Hey, Ricky Lack here. Have you ever just looked around in society and wondered how we got to where we are? It seems like a lot of things that once were held as true are now, being torn down and ignored. And then other things that once we thought, man, as a society, wow, this is bad and evil and wrong. Now it seems like that stuff's being held as somehow being true or beneficial or even something to be admired or obtained. So I think it's a good question to answer is how do we get to a place in society where things are backwards? Truth is now a lie, and what once was held as lies is now true. Things that were once good are now bad. Things that in the past were held as bad are somehow now good. But before we do that, I just want to read a few descriptors for you, and you tell me if you think this accurately describes our society today. It seems like there's just all kind of wickedness everywhere. Lots of evil in the world. Greed, we could even say. Seems like every kind of human depravity you can think of, is going on. It even seems like there's lots of envy, murder, strife, lots of deceit going on. There's even malice and anger. People are gossiping and slandering one another. There's even God haters in our society. People are arrogant and boastful. There seems to be this tendency for people to just create new ways of doing evil. Children now very disrespectful and disobedient toward their parents and other people who are in authority. There seems to be a real lack of truth and understanding in the world. There's no commitment to relationships. There's no fidelity within marriage. There seems to be just an overall lack of mercy and lack of love. I think that's an accurate description of our society today. And I would ask, how do we get here? How do we get our moral standards so twisted and backwards? I would say it's a progression of about 4 or 5 steps. We know the truth when we start out, and then the first step is we start to repress the truth. We just simply kind of turn a blind eye to what seems to be obvious moral truths or absolute moral standards. They're just kind of ignored and repressed. And then from there, it seems like the tendency is to just simply disobey what we think was once good or right and just go the other way. And then that leads us to a place, it seems like in society, where we begin to exchange truths for lies. For example, we can use the example of greed. We all kind of know, if we're honest, we would admit that greed is bad for the heart. It destroys relationships, and so it should be avoided. But it seems like today, greed is actually praised and held high. People actually think it's good to be greedy, to cheat and steal just to gain earthly possessions or even wealth. So what once, is clearly a bad thing, greed, now it seems like it's a good thing. People who are greedy are somehow held to be great. Man, you're doing well if you cheat and steal and end up being rich. So that's an example of how we would exchange a truth for a lie. And then it seems like another step in this whole process of getting moral standards completely twisted and backwards is to devalue what was once held to be valuable. I can think about marriage, At one point in time, it seemed like marriage was this beautiful, valuable relationship meant to be lived out between two consenting adults of the opposite sex. That was a beautiful, valuable thing. And now it almost seems like it's just been completely devalued. There's no value or beauty or truth. It seems like that's the tendency to say that about marriage. I don't want to bring up hot-button issues, but I think that kind of fits the bill. So truths are devalued over time. And then I think the last step we get to is kind of where we're at today. It's where we actually honor those who disobey truths. It seems like we honor those who live very immoral lives. And it just seems like that's how we get to a point to where everything is backwards. Now, what's interesting about all this is I got it all from Romans chapter 1. Paul there concludes with a pretty accurate description, I would say, of what the society was in which he lived, and then you can actually track his comments leading up to that description and see these tendencies. The progression is we know the truth and we begin to repress it. Next, we just disobey those truths, and then we exchange those truths for lies. We actually believe falsehoods. We devalue the old ways or the old ways of thinking about what is true and good and moral. And then finally, when we completely turn our back on the truth, we honor and, give praise to those people who are living lifestyles that seem to be completely opposite of what is just obvious truths, whether that be things of having to do with money, relationships, marriage, or even sexuality. We just glorify people in our society that just live contrary to what seems to be obviously the moral right way to go. So this week our discussion is going to be centered around that process of how we go down a slippery slope and end up where everything is backwards. It's pretty fascinating. It's very interesting. So talk to you again soon.